how did you guys learn to ride a bike? Like, what's the normal method of teaching a kid how to ride a bike? I don't know whether my family were a bit mental or whether I was just receiving the normal tuition. My dad pushed me down a hill. Yeah, basically. I can't ride a bike? Oh, that is unfortunate. Okay. Yeah, I was taught how to ride a bike in my little village, and I was talking a little bit recently on my stream about how bad some areas of the north of England are. I grew up when I was like, what age do you even learn to ride a bike? Like, maybe I was like 5 years old, something like that, maybe 4. I don't know what the normal age is, but, I was a normal kid. What can I say? We lived on the roughest estate you can imagine. It was a village in the middle of the northeast, a mining village, where a couple of years after we moved away, some of the kids that lived next door to us got sent to jail for throwing rocks at a baby in a pram. They just were bored one day and decided to see who could hit the baby in the pram with some rocks. Like, proper rough area. Next to an abattoir, place just stank all the time. What's a pram? Like what do you Americans call it? Like a baby, the thing that a baby gets carried around in on wheels. I don't know how else to describe it. A stroller, is that what you guys call it? Sure. We call it a perambulator, or a pram for short. I don't think anyone's used the word perambulator since Victorian times. Anyway, so yeah, grew up in a really rough area, but it had a lovely field out the back. And one of these fields had a hill down it. So my dad would set me up on a bike, and he would basically just, to practice my balance, he would push me down the hill, and I would have to stay balanced for as long as possible. And I remember bragging to my granddad occasionally, being like, I made it 40 feet this time, 40 feet before I fell off. And I would just essentially be trying to stay balanced as I flew down this hill, gaining more and more momentum until I eventually fell off and just rolled around on the floor a little bit. I think children are made out of rubber, presumably, so I don't really remember getting hurt at all. But once I had some idea of how to balance myself, then it was about just cycling on the flat. So I had to actually maneuver the pedals and sync up my balance with the maneuvering of the pedals. So there was a little alleyway down by the back of this village that we lived in at the time that my dad would have me cycle down. And he used to kind of run alongside me in order to try and catch me. And there was a big bush made of prickles. My dad called it the prickly bush. And even now, my dad will still remember how I would always go deliberately straight for the prickly bush. Because my dad had told me when I first started cycling down that alleyway, don't head for that bush. It's full of prickles. It'll really hurt you. Whatever you do, stay away from the bush. And my little brain was like cycling. And then I saw the bush and I was like, oh God, that's the bush I'm supposed to not go towards. Ah! Like it had its own gravitational pull. Because as a child, you don't understand that when you're looking towards something, you're naturally inclined to go towards it as well. My dad teaches people to drive as well, and he says sometimes when he points out to them like, oh, watch out for that sign on the right hand side, they'll look, but their brains go like whoop, and they steer towards it as well, and he has to grab the steering wheel. So my very first instances of cycling were being pushed down a hill and then flying into this prickly bush repeatedly. And then when I got older, I got into cycling a lot. So I do mountain biking, or at least I did when I lived in...
2 minutes. I'm just going to go live. Sorry.
I did, at least. Thank you for the interruption there, Golden Boy. I did when I lived in England anyway. And so I when I was young, I used to cycle a lot with my friends. They were big into cars, but we couldn't drive cars because we were only like 13 or something. So we used to zip around the estate. I lived in a new area. It was much nicer. And we would go round and round the estate trying to catch each other. Almost like we were doing laps around. And they were like timed laps. So we would have kind of a chase. I don't know where we had got this idea from. But I would set off, and then 5 seconds later, my friend would set off, who was a little bit faster than I was. He was a bit of a better cyclist, and I would try and see how many laps I could get around the estate, around the block, until my friend caught up with me. And one of these times, I'm cycling around, cycling as fast as I can. I look over my shoulder to see whether my friend is behind me, and I hit a parked car. I got full speed. I think I was going slightly downhill, going at about 20 miles an hour, and just cycled full speed into a parked car and just spread on the bonnet. Like, just on the front windscreen, just splattered. And I was crying. Every part of my body hurt. I thought at the beginning that I had been hit by a car, but I had just hit a parked car. And I landed on the bonnet, on the front of the car for any Americans. I can't remember what you guys call it. And I had to peel myself off. And as I was wheeling my bike home, weeping, you know how your body gets shaky when it's full of adrenaline after you've been really hurt as well? I was only like 12, 13, taking this bike back home. And I got into my parents', and my parents were like, what happened? What happened? And I was like, I fell off my bike. And they were like, what the fuck? I was like, I hit a car. Hello. And they were like, what the fuck are you talking about? You hit a car. So they, in the end, they go around to this guy's house. And I've put a huge dent in the front of his car and just a smear mark over his windscreen. So it looks like something just smacked into his bonnet and then smeared oil over the windscreen. The guy came out of his house and was like, "Oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. He looks distraught," because my mum like marched me over, like dragged me by the ear and was like, "You're going to apologize to these people, and we're going to take it out of your." I didn't even have an allowance, but we're going to take it out of your Christmas money if they demand that the car gets fixed. Because my parents were, you know, fairly poor anyway. They can't afford to be fixing up cars left, right, and center because I've decided to run my dumb ass into them. So I haven't had very good experience with cycling. Then I used to cycle when I went to university. I used to cycle in and out to university from the fresher places. And if you've ever cycled in a city, especially one that's in Europe, you know that there's buses everywhere. The cycle lanes share the bus lanes. And the buses in Manchester, I think they used to have a little death pool going to see how many cyclists they could murder every week. So I would have to zigzag out in between the buses. About 2 weeks in, I decided to cycle up to a place to meet one of my TF2 friends, actually, who lived in Manchester, a guy called Turbo Monkey. And so I cycled, weaved in and out of the buses, got there, it was about 11 p.m, locked up my bike outside, and got hammered. We were doing tequila slammers the entire night, just did like fucking 10 of them, absolutely blasted. And I get out and I'm like, oh, fuck, I've got a bike to be able to cycle back through the night. And so, cycled drunk, weaving out of the buses back through Manchester, just in and out of all of these lanes, which was a terrible idea. But the worst time cycling through Manchester was in the rain, because when it rains and you're cycling, there's no way to keep yourself dry. You're just going to be drenched through. And if you're wearing a backpack and it's got your university work in it, well, your backpack's going to get drenched as well. And it rains in Manchester. I mean, it rains. It fucking pours down. So I devised a system. Where I put an umbrella in my backpack and then deployed it out the top of my head. So this umbrella went in front of my face and over my backpack as well. And it was kind of wedged in there. The problem is, when you're cycling along with an umbrella in your backpack, sometimes it falls all over the place. And this one slid down slowly as I was cycling until it covered my eyes. And so now I've just got a fucking umbrella in front of my face, like a parasol trying to keep my lily white skin away from the sun. And I'm just blind cycling around in Manchester trying to weave through the buses. So I had to cycle one-handed, one hand on the umbrella and one hand on the bicycle, just trying to fucking maneuver my way through this area. Nearly got fucking killed. So I have no idea how I've managed to stay alive on bicycles. But my most unfortunate incident ever happened when I came to Los Angeles. I bought a bike and had the worst experience of my life cycling around LA. It was appalling. Let's get back into it. So I was talking to you guys previously about how I how I had a bad history with bicycles. But I enjoy cycling. I've cycled my entire life. So I used to cycle to commute all the time. So I got to LA when I first moved here in 2018. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to drive a car here because I would have to take a driving test, and I don't know how long I'm going to be here. I'd have to buy a car. I might only be here for a year. Who knows? So instead, I'll get a bike because Ubers are going to be really expensive. So I researched a little bit. I look it up. There's an LA bike path that kind of weaves around, and it pretty much loops up where I live and where the studio is, the old Blizzard Arena. So I think, okay, great. I could probably cycle to work. It'd take about half an hour every day, but that's what I used to do when I lived in Preston, cycling to the hospital. So that seems okay. The problem is buying a bike. I'm not really familiar with the shops in the same way as I am in the UK. It's one of these weird things when you move to a new country. You don't really know where to go to get things. And so I didn't know whether there was some kind of supermarket store that sold reasonable bikes. I didn't know whether I should buy them on Amazon or go to a bike store. So I checked out all of these places, but they all seemed very expensive. This was back when I'd first started getting paid by Owl as well. And it takes a while for the payments to get processed when you first move over here because you need a social security number and make sure that you're filing it properly with taxes and stuff. So I didn't really have much money when I first moved over. So I was like, okay, I'll buy a secondhand bike. I'll go on Craigslist. I've heard of Craigslist. I'll buy a secondhand bike from there. So I get in touch with a guy that has a bike, and he's in downtown LA. So he wants to meet me in downtown LA. That's okay. So I get an Uber to downtown LA. It costs quite a bit of money. It's like $20, something like that, for an Uber to downtown LA. So at this point, I'm almost pot committed. I meet with the guy, and the bike is so small. It's like a fucking child's bike. It's kind of a mountain bike, road bike hybrid, but it's really small. I mean, my knees were coming up to my chest height while I was cycling it. And so I tested it a bit, and it seemed okay. It seemed a bit clunky, and it was certainly old, but it would do. It was fine for a commuter bike, I thought. And at this point, I mean, I've managed to negotiate with him a little bit, and if I take an Uber back, then I've just spent $40 to not buy a bike. So I might as well save myself the $20 and cycle home and actually get this bike. So I pay $150, something like that, for this bike that's way too small for me. And I start cycling back from downtown LA to Glendale. Now, I don't know whether you guys have any scope of how big Los Angeles is, but to cycle from downtown LA back to Glendale takes about 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours, especially if you don't know where you're going and you can't use the freeways, right? So you have to use back roads as low traffic as possible in order to try and survive, because LA traffic is not conducive to a living if you want to cycle inside of it. So I set off cycling back. I connect to the Los Angeles cycle route, the bike path, which is not really a bike path. It's actually where all the homeless people live. As far as I'm aware, very few people cycle down it. I think some people occasionally jog down there and stuff, but it's a lot of homeless people. It's along the river, and the river itself is a puddle, an absolute trickle. There's nothing going on in the LA River because the place has just been in a drought for just how many years. And there's like trolleys and fucking random little bits and pieces that have been thrown inside of it. Tanobi, thank you for the 6 months. So I'm cycling along there while homeless people are like, hello, whatever. And I'm like, okay, this isn't too bad. I'm cycling in the sun. It's blue skies. I'm still like, this is my first month in Los Angeles, so I'm soaking it all in. It's a nice experience cycling back. The problem was the cycle path was actually blocked. For some unknown reason, the cycle path itself was chained up and locked at one part. And so I couldn't get any further through it. So I hopped over the chained off part and dragged my bike over as well, this bike that I'd just bought, and I set off cycling again. But it's blocked again. And I'm like, okay, I've never been down the bike path before, but I feel like it shouldn't be locked. So I swing out onto the road, and I actually find a guy that's working there, that's working on either construction or guarding the entrance. I couldn't quite remember. And I said to him, hey, why is the bike path blocked? Can I continue up that way? And he's like, no, it's blocked the entire way. They're doing work on it. You can't use the bike path right now. It's signposted. You'll have to leave. The signpost did not tell you any diversion or how to get around it. They directed you to the freeway. So I was cycling around, and at this point, I'm just completely lost, because even Google Maps will not tell you how to have a diversion. If I type in, hey, I want to cycle here, it says, yeah, use the bike path, dumb shit. And then I'm just shouting at my phone like, I can't use the bike path is locked off. This guy won't let me onto the bike path. So if I say, all right, well, I guess I'll like walk or something, just like use the bike path. If I want to drive, it directs me to this freeway. So I decided to just kind of wing it. I went down a horse track instead. I found like a bridle way. And this horse track goes kind of parallel to the bike path, but it wasn't locked off. It did say no traffic down here allowed, but okay, I'll go down this horse track. I mean, in the UK, you're allowed to cycle down bridle ways. They're kind of public access. You can walk down them, you can ride down them, that kind of thing. Now, I should have remembered that we're in the land of the free here, which means you're free to buy a bike path and not allow anyone else to walk on it. I was cycling along, and I came across a woman on a horse leading another horse next to her. And I have to kind of weave around to the right-hand side of these people. So I'm cycling along, and I cycle around the right-hand side. She doesn't really hear me, and this horse that she's leading gets freaked out and is like, as I ride past it, and I'm like, oh, God. Because horses, they're not scary, but you don't want to be behind a horse while it's freaking out. You don't want to be anywhere near a horse while it's freaking out. So I like try and give this horse a really wide berth while it's freaking out about me a little bit. And the woman on the horse is like, what the hell are you doing around here? You're not allowed to be around here. I don't know what accent that is. I don't know where she's from in my head. But, in a normal California accent, she's just like, you can't cycle around here. This is private property. It says horse track, but it's owned by the stables. The like Burbank stables, I think it is, because we're on the Burbank side of the river at this point. So I was like, well, the bike path is locked off. I don't know where to go, and I'm just trying to get across the river. The river is in my way right now, and I can see a bridge up ahead to the right. I'm like, please, can you just let me through onto the bridge? And she's like, you literally cannot cross that bridge. That bridge is for maintenance only. It's locked, and it's about this wide. You won't be able to get across it. And the only other way to get across is the stables route, which you're not allowed in. It's private property. So I was like, fucking hell. So I cycle a little bit further down this horse track, leaving old Grumpy Pants and her horse behind me. And I see that there is a road to the left-hand side. And I'm like, right, okay, well, the cars must have to cross from the left-hand side of the river to the right-hand side of the river. They must have to do that at some point. So if I follow the road parallel to the river, I must be able to find a bridge that connects me. So I hop through this hole in the fence and drag my bike, and I plop it on the road. And I realize that this is just a connector onto the freeway. But I'm pot committed at this point. I can't go back onto the horse track. The horse lady is there. What am I supposed to tell her? Sorry, I'm too scared to cycle on the freeway. She'd lash me. She'd lasso me and drag me along behind a horse. Maybe that's what I should have done. Maybe I should not have cycled on the freeway. But instead, I thought, all right, I'll just cycle along the very edge of the freeway up until I find a point where I can get back off again. So I get on, and thankfully there's another kind of exit almost directly in front of me. So I just cycle along the very edge, miles away from all of the traffic, in the slow lane, of course, because it's on the right-hand side. And I just take this very quick exit off the right-hand side. As I exit off the right-hand side, I realize that I am surrounded by people selling flowers. I didn't know that this was a thing, but there's just people selling flowers at the side of this freeway exit. Tons of them, like 20, 30 people. So I'm cycling along while people are offering me flowers repeatedly. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on? I cycle around, and it's one of these like loop-de-loop roads, you know? You come off the freeway, you loop around, and you start going underneath the freeway through a tunnel. So I'm cycling, and I'm like, okay, I'm moving at this point away from the river in the exact opposite direction of the one I want to go. But this has definitely got to connect me onto a bridge at some point. So I cycle along. I go down this path, go down the road a little bit more, and I see a bridge. There's a turn to the right-hand side with a bridge that crosses the river. It's a T-junction with traffic lights and a right-hand turn. So I'm like, fucking I can get across this goddamn trickle of a river. So I turn right, and I keep cycling, and it's kind of weird. There's like, what do you call them? The blockers for cars. But I can get past them because I'm on a bike, and I don't really think about it. I'm like, that's weird. It's almost like a train crossing, but there's no train tracks. It's kind of strange. So I cycle through, and I hear this guy behind me shouting, Sir, you can't go through there, sir. I look behind me, and this rather large, plump, what do you call him? Security guard is waving me down, being like, you can't go in there. I'm like, what the hell? And I had just cycled into the Warner Brothers studio. I had just cycled just straight into Warner Brothers, straight past the security guard that was waiting to stop cars. And I had just on my old ramshackle bike just cycled into the Warner Brothers studios. And he was like, this is the studio, sir. This is Warner Brothers. You'll have to go around. And I was like, I'm lost. Can you help me? And he's like, yeah, if you go down here and you turn right and you take the next right, you'll be on the other side of the studio and you'll be able to get to where you're going. Thank you so much. I set off cycling again. By this time, it's been 2 hours. It's been 2 hours of getting lost, dragging my bike around, getting shouted at by 3 different people for going the wrong way. Bike fucking path is closed. I'm not having a good time. I get around the other side of Warner Brothers. I actually recognize where I am at this point because I'm very close to the studio. I'm not trying to get to the studio. I'm trying to get home. So I'm about half an hour away from home. I know that, and I know the way back from here, which is great. I get to a traffic light. It's a red light. And the gears feel a little bit weird. I'm like, all right, okay. So I kind of cycle a little bit slowly for a sec, just getting things into the right gear. I finally clunk, 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 and it settles into the right gear. I'm like, okay. I wait for the light to go green. Light goes green. I set off. I press my foot down. Ping! My chain just snaps. My chain just fucking snaps to pieces. It's just instead of being a loop, it is a just wibbly little snake of a chain. And the middle parts were just fucked up. I had just snapped them to pieces. So now I've got a bike that is too small for me, with gears that don't quite work, a broken bike chain, and I have already spent 2 hours getting there, and it cost me $150 to even get it in the first place. So I know that the studio is somewhere nearby. So I scooted along. The bike chain itself doesn't work, and for any of you guys that haven't ridden a bike in a long time, if the bike chain doesn't work, then the pedals don't produce forward motion, but the pedals themselves will just freely move. So I put one of the pedals down on the floor, and and then I'm just like holding on with that one and scooting the bike along, just scooting away along the side of the road, just down the pavement, down the footpath. And as I'm like scooting down the Burbank area, I eventually get my way to the studio, and I park it in the bike area. I haven't bought a bike lock. That was supposed to be like later that day, but I hadn't got a chance to really acquire one. But I think, come on, Josh. No one's gonna steal an undersized bike with a broken chain that they have to scoot away down the road, are they? No one would do that. I go into work for a sec. I talk to the rest of the people in there, the other colleagues. I'm like, you won't believe what's happened to me. Regale the story. I'm like, yeah, bike's out front. Like, oh, how are you going to get it home? I was like, well, I don't really know. I guess I'll have to like call an Uber XL and put it in the back or something like that. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I get my phone out, call the Uber XL, rolls out the front. I go and meet it. Yeah. Is it all right if I put my bike in your back? Yeah, it is, mate. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I'll just go get it. Don't worry. Walk around the corner. It has been less than an hour. Less than an hour. And it's gone. It's been stolen. A bike that I didn't even want. I didn't want it. It was too small for me. It was broken. I had to scoot it around Burbank. Who would have stolen it? But it was gone. It just got nicked immediately. So I went home, and I have never purchased a bike since then. It's been 3 years, and fuck cycling in LA.